how do you make your bread less sour? Or some people actually want to know, how do you make your bread more sour? If you understand how to do one, you also understand the other. And that's why in this video, I'm going to be telling you 17 different ways how you can adjust and influence the sourness of your sourdough bread. Here I have with me my sourdough starter. I have a fully whole grain sourdough bread that's more the European German style, and then I have a somewhat failed bread that actually still tastes really good. And yes, gasp, it still happens to be that every so often the bread doesn't come out the way I wanted. We have already dug into it, but the taste is fabulous. So the first question, and if this is a little scientific for you and you're not really into all the science behind it, it's not that complicated, but you can also skip forward, is really what is sourdough. Sourdough helps aerate your bread dough. It is called a leavening agent. Another one might be yeast or baking powder or baking soda. And sourdough is a happy culture of microbes, and you will find some yeasts in it, some natural yeasts, some lactobacillic bacteria that can be either lactic acid or acetic acid. And here's where that makes a difference, because the lactic acid is what you find in yogurt, so it has more of a mellow tang to it, versus the acetic acid, which is more like a vinegar type of acid, and that makes your bread really sour and gives it that vinegary smell and taste. And if it's gone too far, it will taste like nail polish or smell like acetone. Usually these microbes live in your sourdough culture in a happy sort of balance, but understanding how you can encourage the growth of one and not so much the other helps you understand how you can manage the sourness of your bread. The first way you can affect the sourness of your sourdough bread is with the flour. So number one, if you use a very white all-purpose flour, your bread will be on the more mellow side. If you like it a little bit more sour, I encourage you to increase the ratio of whole grains. You don't need to go fully whole grain or white. You can also do something in the middle. This is an 85%, so that is somewhat dark, but not really. And ultimately, you're going to have to play with the ratios and just see what kind of flours you have access to and what kind of taste you really like. If you really want to take it up a notch, you can add rye flour to your sourdough bread. I don't have any rye flour right now, and these are my rye berries that I grind in my mock grain mill, and you can just go ahead and grind those, or you can also buy rye flour and you can sift out the bran, make it a little bit wider, but that rye flour is like steroids for a sourdough and it makes it extra sour. If you like your sourdough bread to be a little bit more on the mellow side and you would like to add something else, I have found that adding oat flour actually makes it a little bit more milder. I have played with various grains in my denser German Vollkornbrot, whole grain bread, and by adding some oat flour or oat grains, I have found that it actually really mellows out the taste. Another way you can adjust the sourness of your sourdough is with temperature, and one is the temperature of the dough, the fermentation temperature. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to control. In the summer, your temperatures are just going to naturally be warmer than in the winter when it's naturally colder. Sometimes you can find a warmer spot in the winter or try to find a cooler spot in the summer. However, warmer temperatures encourage the lactic acid production, or the production of the lactic acid bacteria. So if you want your bread to be less sour, you want to increase the fermentation temperature. And you can likewise also retard your sourdough with putting it in the refrigerator for an extended amount of time, and that will typically make it a little bit more complex and not like super sour, but a little bit more on the sour side. An easier way to control The temperature is by the temperature of the water that you add to your dough. If you want your bread to be a little bit mellower, you add 90-degree Fahrenheit water to your dough. And if you want your bread a little bit more on the sour side, you add 80 degrees or so. I mean, it doesn't have to be super specific to your dough when you're mixing your dough. Something that you can absolutely control is the fermentation time, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the fermentation temperature. So if you think about it, if it's really warm, your sourdough is going to rise faster than if it's colder, and you will thus need less time if it's warmer than if it's colder. If it's warmer, you need a shorter fermentation time. So if you like your bread to be a little bit less sour, you shorten the fermentation time. And if you want your bread to have a more pronounced sourness and a little bit more complex, robust flavors, you can extend the fermentation time, and that is why people put it in the refrigerator, because there you can actually keep it for so long and it's not really going to go bad. And some people actually keep their sourdough in the refrigerator for 2 to 3 days to really get that deep, complex sourdough flavor. Here's your sourdough starter. Mine is in the dormant state. I'm linking a video in which I am teaching you the kind of maintenance method that I use for keeping my sourdough starter in between bakings. That is no feedings, no discards, and no measuring. Super simple, super easy. And one is the age of your sourdough starter. A younger sourdough starter is always going to be a little bit more mellow than an older, mature one. So if you like your bread to be a lot more sour, you just keep yours going. And if you want your bread to be a little bit less sour, you use a younger starter. And some people just make new starters all the time because they don't like the really sour taste of the older, mature sourdough starters. You can also adjust the sourness by how often you feed your sourdough starter. If you feed your sourdough starter a lot more often, it will be mellower. And if you feed it less often, it will be more sour. And some people put their sourdough starters without anything else, just in the refrigerator, and that also slows it down, develops the flavor, makes it a little bit more sour, and you won't have to feed it quite so often. So there's ways that you can play with that. Another way is to check the hydration of your sourdough starter. If you like your bread a little bit more sour, use a stiffer, drier, less hydration sourdough starter. And if you want your bread on the milder side, use a higher hydration sourdough starter, something that's a little bit more watery, a little bit more runny. The amount of sourdough starter that you add to your bread, if you add a lot of sourdough starter to your bread, it will be a little bit less sour. And if you add just a small amount of sourdough starter, then your bread will be a little bit more sour. And that kind of really makes sense, because if you add just a little less sourdough starter, it's going to take your bread longer to rise. And we already talked about the fermentation time. If you extend the fermentation time, it will increase the sourness. And then the type of starters, some people love to have 100% rye sourdough starter, rye flour or whole grain rye flour that you grind in your own grain mill is really good for activating your sourdough starter and getting it going. But then you can still make 100% whole wheat bread, or let me put it differently, you can use 100% wheat flour for your bread and still use a rye starter, and you're not going to really taste the rye flavor all so much, but that will also increase the sourness of your sourdough bread. This next method is a little bit more, I don't want to say scientific, but a little bit more specific, and you will have to observe your sourdough starter a little bit more. Every sourdough starter, when you feed it, and you can put a rubber band around your jar to see where it's at, it's going to have a certain height. You feed it, and then it's going to rise, and then you'll notice that after some hours, it will actually deflate again. So here's what you can do. If you use your sourdough starter and feed it again before it has reached its peak, it will be less sour. And if you let your sourdough starter get to the peak or just a little bit after the peak, it will make your dough a little bit more sour. In my sourdough method, which is really easy, and again, for making a starter, you don't have to feed or discard anything from your sourdough starter. I tell people to vigorously stir their sourdough starters every day or every other day. So what does that do? It adds air, oxygen, to your sourdough starter cultures, and that promotes the production of the acid bacteria, the more sour bacteria. So the more air you add to your sourdough, whether that's your starter or your actual dough, the more sour it will be. And if you just mix it really quick and then just let it sit, it's going to be a little bit more on the mellow side. You can also make a pre-ferment. Sometimes that's called a leaven or a levain in French, or a mother culture, and that is usually when you use a small amount of starter and a small amount of flour and water and let that sit for 12 to 24 hours, and then add that to your whole dough, and that will also increase the sourness and the more complex, robust flavors of your sourdough bread. An interesting way that you don't usually hear a lot about is the role that salt plays in your sourdough baking. Typically you want to salt your sourdough bread at about a 1 to 2% percentage. And I have found that if you increase the amount of salt, it will decrease the sourness of your bread. It will kind of keep the bacteria in check. And if you like your bread a little bit more sour, you would add just a little bit, like 1% or just a little less than 1% of your complete dough measurements of salt. And that's a really easy way to control the sourness of your sourdough bread. You can add extra ingredients to your sourdough bread. I don't do this very often, but some people like to add milk to their sourdough bread, or butter, or some sort of oil, avocado oil, olive oil, whatever oil they have. And that's going to decrease the sourness of your sourdough bread. I also know that adding baking soda will decrease the sourness of your sourdough bread because it balances out the acidity of the sourdough. And a really easy way to play with all of this is go ahead and bake a sourdough bread. If you haven't started, I have a super easy, beginner-friendly sourdough, no knead artisan style bread. I'll see you over in that video. Thank you so much for watching.